The late afternoon sun cast long amber shadows across Oak Ridge Street, turning the cracked sidewalks into a patchwork of gold and gray. The school bell had rung nearly 20 minutes ago, and the neighborhood was slowly coming to life. Kids on bikes weaving through parked cars, mothers calling from porches, and somewhere down the street, a lawnmower coughed to life. 14-year-old Nia Thompson walked home alone, violin case in hand, her backpack bouncing lightly against her shoulder. She was humming under her breath, practicing scales in her head for the recital next week. It was supposed to be her first solo, Moonlight Sonata, a piece she had begged her teacher to let her play. She was thinking about her mother too, Sergeant Maya Thompson, who was finally coming home after 6 months of deployment overseas. Tonight was supposed to be about celebration. Dinner at Mama D's diner, her mother's favorite fried catfish, maybe even ice cream after. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. Halfway down Oak Ridge, a black and white police cruiser slowed beside her, its tires crunching the loose gravel. The car crawled along at her walking pace. Nia felt it before she saw it, that strange awareness that she was being watched. Her humming stopped. A voice called out through the rolled-down window. "Hey! You there, what's in the case?" She turned, startled. The officer inside was a heavy-set man with a reddish face and small, assessing eyes. His name tag read D. Connolly. He had the kind of smirk that didn't belong to someone protecting and serving, it belonged to someone entertained. It's my violin, sir," she replied softly. He tilted his head, amused. "A violin? You expect me to believe that?" "Yes, sir. I'm walking home from Lincoln Middle. I have a recital next week." Dale Connolly opened his door slowly, the hinges squealing. "Let's take a look then. You don't mind if I check, right?" Nia hesitated. Her mother had always told her to be respectful, calm, and never argue. But something in her chest trembled. "Do I have to?" "It's just my—" "Open it," he snapped, stepping closer. A few passers-by had started slowing down, watching from the sidewalk across the street. One of them, a teenage boy with a phone in his hand, started recording. The air changed, quiet but tense, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Nia placed the violin case on the curb and unclipped the latches with shaking fingers. Inside, the varnished wood gleamed in the sunlight, a soft honey color, delicate, beautiful. Officer Connolly let out a laugh that echoed down the street. "Well, look at that. I didn't know they taught you people classical music." The words hit her like stones. She blinked rapidly, not sure if she had heard him right. But the laughter said enough. He leaned on the hood of his cruiser, grinning. "What are you doing carrying it around like that? Stealing it from someone's porch?" It's mine," she whispered. "It was a gift from my mom." "Your mom, huh?" He laughed again, looking her up and down. "She buy it with her welfare check." A couple of people gasped audibly from the sidewalk. The boy filming muttered, "Man, that's messed up." Nia's face burned hot with humiliation. Her small hands clutched the violin case as though it could protect her from the weight of those words. She didn't know what to do, run, cry, or scream. But she remembered her mother's voice, calm and steady even when the world wasn't. "Stay composed, baby. Dignity is our armor." So she stood still. Silent. Trembling. Officer Connolly seemed almost disappointed by her quiet. He took a step closer, towering over her. "You nervous, huh? What, you hiding something else in that backpack?" "No, sir. sir. Just schoolbooks. Then open it up. She obeyed, kneeling down on the sidewalk and pulling out her math notebook, a crumpled sandwich bag, and a small bottle of rosin for her bow. He watched with mild boredom, like a cat toying with a mouse. When he was satisfied, he chuckled again. You know, I could take you in for being uncooperative. But since I'm feeling generous, I'll let you walk, after I run your name. He reached for his radio, but before he could speak, a woman across the street shouted, "She's a kid. Leave her alone." He looked up sharply. "Ma'am, I suggest you move along if you don't want to interfere with police business." The woman didn't move. Police business? That's a child with a violin. The camera phones multiplied. 3 more bystanders had joined, capturing every second. Nia stood frozen, eyes wide, her violin still in her hand like a fragile piece of her identity dangling between fear and defiance. Officer Connolly lowered his radio slowly. His grin faltered just a bit when he noticed the phones. Still, he tried to recover with mock patience. "All right, sweetheart, you can go. Don't get smart with officers next time. Just remember who keeps these streets safe." But the words had already burned into her memory. She whispered, "I didn't do anything wrong." "What was that?" he barked. Her lips quivered. "I said. I didn't do anything wrong." For a second, his expression hardened, the fragile male ego stung by defiance. He took a step closer, voice low. "Watch that tone, girl. Don't start something you'll regret." Before she could respond, the lady across the street shouted again. "It's all on camera." That broke the tension. Dale hesitated, then turned toward his cruiser. "Go on home," he muttered. "And don't make me see you carrying that thing again, you hear?" Nia nodded quickly, grabbed her violin, and started walking fast, not running, but close to it. Her knees felt weak. The air around her buzzed with leftover adrenaline and shame. By the time she turned the corner, her composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She ducked behind a tall hedge near the corner store and sat on the curb, her violin case clutched tight to her chest. Her phone buzzed, 2 missed calls from her mom, 1 unread message, "Landing soon, baby. Can't wait to see you." Nia stared at the message through blurry eyes, her thumb hovering over the screen. She didn't want to ruin her mother's homecoming. But she couldn't stop shaking. Behind her, Oak Ridge Street was alive with murmurs. "Did you see that? He really said that. I got it all on video." The sound of justice, or maybe the start of it, was already moving like a spark in dry grass. Nia wiped her face, stood up, and walked the rest of the way home in silence. She didn't know that within a few hours, the clip would have tens of thousands of views, or that by morning, the world would know her name. But in that moment, just a small girl on a cracked sidewalk clutching her violin, all she knew was that her mother couldn't come home soon enough. The next morning dawned heavy with the kind of silence that follows a storm. But the storm wasn't over, it was only beginning to gather strength. Nia Thompson didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the officer's laughter again, sharp, mocking, bouncing off the inside of her skull. "Didn't know they taught you people classical music." The words replayed like a cruel melody that refused to end. She sat by her window as the first light slipped through the blinds, her violin case beside her. The world outside looked ordinary, a mail truck rumbling past, sprinklers misting the lawns, the sky a calm gray-blue. But her world had changed. The street where she'd walked every day now felt like a border she wasn't sure she could cross again. At 7 a.m., her phone buzzed. Her best friend, Tasha, had sent a link with a short caption. "Girl, it's everywhere." Nia hesitated before opening it. Her stomach twisted as the screen filled with a grainy video, her on Oak Ridge Street, clutching her violin while Officer Connolly towered over her. His words were clear, his tone unmistakable. In the background, the woman's voice shouted, "That's a child." The video ended abruptly, but not before catching the officer's smirk and the cruel laughter that followed. Beneath it, the comments were flooding in. "This is sickening. She handled herself better than most adults would. Get this man off the streets. Anyone know who the girl is? She's so brave." Her hands trembled. Brave? She hadn't felt brave. She'd felt small, like a note gone wrong in a song she had practiced her whole life. By mid-morning, the clip had been shared thousands of times across platforms. The title varied: Officer Harris's Black Teen with Violin, Racial Profiling in Broad Daylight, Oak Ridge Street Incident. Reporters began reaching out to local activists, and within hours, the mayor's office had received calls demanding a statement. But none of that mattered to Nia as much as the single unanswered call in her phone log, her mother's. She had missed it last night, too shaken to speak. Her mom, Sergeant Maya Thompson, had landed in Atlanta only 2 hours before the incident. Nia had wanted to wait until morning to tell her, to try to sound strong. But now the truth was no longer a secret. The world already knew. At school, the hallways buzzed with whispers. Some kids came up to her, offering hugs or murmured support. Others just stared, unsure what to say. A few teachers stopped by her desk and touched her shoulder gently, sympathy wrapped in silence. But one teacher, Mr. Carter, a thin man with wireframe glasses, pulled her aside after class. "You did nothing wrong, Nia," he said quietly. "Sometimes, the world needs witnesses to believe what's always been happening. That video, it's going to change something." She nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. All she wanted was for her mom to come home. Meanwhile, across town, inside the Oak Ridge Police Precinct, Officer Dale Connolly was pacing in the break room, his face redder than usual. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, slamming his coffee down. "It's just another social media witch hunt. The kid was acting suspicious. I was doing my job." His partner, Officer Mills, looked uneasy. "Man, you told her, you people. That's not a good look." "I was joking," Dale snapped. "The internet doesn't understand humor anymore." But when the captain entered, a gray-haired man named Captain Harris, the room fell silent. Harris's tone was cold as steel. "Connolly. My office. Now." Dale tried to protest, but the captain cut him off. "You're trending nationwide. The chief's been on the phone since sunrise. You better start praying that girl's story doesn't go national, because if it does, no badge is going to protect you." Dale's smirk faded. He'd been on the force 12 years, long enough to think himself untouchable. But even he could feel the shift, the slow burn of consequences catching up. Back at Lincoln Middle, Nia sat in the music room after school, alone. The violin rested on her lap, untouched. She stared at it, remembering how her mother had given it to her on her 10th birthday. "Every note you play, baby, is a piece of your truth. Don't ever let the world silence it." Her fingers brushed the strings softly. The sound that came out was fragile but alive. It wavered in the still air, trembling with everything she couldn't say out loud. Then her phone rang. She froze at the sight of the name, Mom Redheart. She hesitated before answering. "Hi, Mom." "Nia," came the voice, firm but full of love. "I just saw the video." Nia's breath caught. "Mom, I didn't mean to." "Hush, baby," Maya said gently. "You don't need to explain anything to me. Are you safe right now?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. I'm coming straight there. I want you home when I arrive." There was something in her mother's tone, calm, controlled, but with a current of restrained fury beneath it. The kind of voice Nia had only heard once before, when her mom had stopped a fight outside their house and made two grown men back away without raising her hand. When the call ended, Nia finally exhaled. Around her, the music room seemed larger, emptier. The echoes of her mother's voice mingled with the faint hum of the city outside. By late afternoon, news vans had gathered outside the police precinct. Reporters stood under umbrellas, speaking into microphones while the video played on loop behind them. Activists were calling for an investigation. Parents from Nia's school were organizing a peaceful rally. Inside her house, Nia sat curled on the couch, watching it all unfold. Her grandmother, Mama D, had come over and was pacing the living room, muttering prayers under her breath. Then came the sound, distant at first, then closer, the rumble of a car pulling up in the driveway. Mama D looked out the window and smiled faintly. "She's here." Nia ran to the door before she could stop herself. Her mother stepped out of the black SUV, her uniform still crisp, metals gleaming against the fading light. Her posture was straight, her eyes unreadable, but there was something in her expression that made Nia's knees weaken. It wasn't anger. It was resolve. Maya walked up the steps slowly, her boots heavy against the wooden porch. When she reached her daughter, she knelt down so their eyes met. "I saw everything," she said softly. "And I promise you, this ends tonight." Nia felt tears well up again. "Mom," he laughed at me. Maya brushed a tear from her cheek. "Let him laugh. Because tomorrow, he's going to answer for every word." Behind them, the neighborhood lights flickered on, one by one, as if the entire block was watching, holding its breath for what would come next. The crowd had recorded. The world had seen. But now, a mother in uniform was about to walk into that precinct, not as a spectator, but as justice incarnate. And Oak Ridge Street would never be the same again. The rain started sometime after dusk, a steady, whispering drizzle that streaked the streetlights and painted the night in blurred halos of gold. From the window of the Thompson house, Nia watched the water slide down the glass in trembling lines, her reflection faint and ghost-like behind it. The news was still on in the background, though the words no longer felt real. The Oak Ridge Street incident continues to spark outrage across the state. The officer, identified as Sergeant Dale Connolly, has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The video, viewed over 1.8 million times, shows. Mama D muted the TV with a weary sigh. "Baby, you should try to rest. Your mom'll handle this." Nia nodded faintly but didn't move. Rest wasn't possible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the blue and red lights flashing against her skin, felt the cold laughter vibrating in her chest. Her mother had gone to the precinct an hour ago. She'd said little before leaving, only that she would set things straight. The way she'd said it made even Mama D fall silent. Now, the house seemed to pulse with quiet tension. The clock ticked, the refrigerator hummed, and outside, tires hissed on wet pavement. Nia's violin sat open on the coffee table, its polished body reflecting the lamplight like a fragile sun. She picked it up without thinking. Her bow trembled as she drew it across the strings, the sound raw and uneven, not music, but emotion searching for shape. Then, faintly, she began to play Amazing Grace. Her grandmother closed her eyes, whispering the words under her breath, voice quivering with both prayer and pride. Across town, the Oak Ridge police precinct was a storm of its own. The lobby buzzed with reporters trying to slip in through the glass doors, flashing cameras against the reflections of badges. A line of uniformed officers stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces taut with unease. Then, through the doorway, Sergeant Maya Thompson entered. Her uniform, still damp from the rain, gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights. The air seemed to still around her, a sudden gravity that made even the chatter in the corners die down. The stripes on her sleeve, the glint of her medals, the calm fire in her eyes, all of it spoke of command. She strode to the front desk where a young officer looked up, startled. "Ma'am, visiting hours are over." "I'm not visiting," Maya interrupted, voice low and measured. "I'm retrieving my daughter." The officer blinked, unsure how to respond, when Captain Harris appeared from a nearby hallway. His face paled slightly. "Sergeant Thompson. I was just about to call you." "I imagine you were," Maya replied, stepping closer. "Where is she?" "She's safe at home, ma'am," the captain said quickly. "We released her last night." "There was a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," Maya repeated, her tone slicing through the word. "You mean an officer humiliating a 14-year-old on the street for carrying a violin?" The captain shifted uneasily. "The footage looks bad, I won't deny it. We're conducting an internal review." "You don't need a review," Maya said, eyes sharp. "You need accountability." Her voice didn't rise, but it carried through the room like thunder. Officers at nearby desks froze mid-motion, pretending to type while listening. "I've served this country for 17 years, she continued, her voice gaining quiet power. "I've worn this uniform in places where bullets tore through walls and people still managed to respect the flag sewn on my shoulder. But yesterday, an officer wearing that same flag used it to disgrace a child, my child. So you'll forgive me, Captain, if I don't have much faith in your review." The captain rubbed his forehead, the tension in the room thickening. "Sergeant Thompson, please, this will be handled through proper channels." "Proper channels?" Maya stepped closer. "Those same channels that protect bad cops and punish silence." "Tell me." "Captain, what's the proper channel for explaining to a child why the people sworn to protect her laughed in her face?" No one spoke. The rain tapped softly against the precinct windows, like applause for truth that had waited too long to be spoken. Finally, the captain sighed. "You have every right to file a formal complaint. I'll make sure Internal Affairs reviews it personally. And Sergeant Connolly will be off duty until further notice." Maya's expression didn't soften. "He won't wear that badge again. Not after what he's done." The captain nodded slowly, defeated. "Understood." At home, the front door creaked open around midnight. Nia jumped to her feet, nearly dropping her violin. Her mother stood in the doorway, wet boots on the mat, rain still dripping from the brim of her cap. She looked tired but steady, the kind of tired that comes not from weakness but from battle. "Mama," Nia whispered. Maya crossed the room in 2 strides and wrapped her arms around her daughter. For a moment, all the strength she'd held onto at the station dissolved into that single embrace. "You did nothing wrong, Nia. Nothing." Nia clung to her tightly. I tried to tell him, Mama. I told him it was just my violin. He laughed at me. Maya pulled back enough to meet her eyes. He laughed because he thought he could. Because he's never been told no by someone who could fight back. But that changes now. Mama D sniffed from the armchair, trying not to cry. The Lord sure picked the wrong woman to mess with that man's career. Maya allowed herself a small, tired smile. It's not just about him. It's about the next child who'll walk home with something beautiful in their hands and not have to be afraid. She sat down, removing her cap, her hair damp and clinging to her temples. The media's already on it. The mayor called for an investigation tonight. There'll be press, interviews, noise. But we'll handle it our way, with grace and truth. Nia looked down at her violin. I don't want to be famous for this. Her mother's gaze softened. You won't be. You'll be remembered for how you kept your head high when someone tried to take your dignity away. The girl nodded slowly, then asked, will he go to jail? Maybe, Maya said. But justice isn't just punishment, sweetheart. It's change. And that's what we're going to demand. For a while, they sat in silence, the kind that felt like healing rather than emptiness. Outside, the rain began to fade, leaving behind a sheen of silver on the streets. Then, softly, Nia lifted her violin again. Her bow touched the strings, hesitant at first, then stronger. The melody rose, the same one she had practiced all week, only now it sounded different. Deeper. Older. Like grief turning slowly into courage. Her mother listened, her eyes glistening. And as the final note faded into the quiet house, Maya whispered, tomorrow, I go back to that station, in full uniform. This time, not as a mother asking questions, but as a soldier demanding answers. Outside, thunder rolled far away, deep and deliberate, the sound of something approaching. Not a storm of chaos this time, but of reckoning. The morning broke over Oak Ridge with a quiet intensity, a sky the color of pewter, clouds hanging low and heavy, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. The rain had stopped some time before dawn, but the streets still glistened, slick with reflection. Inside the Thompson house, the air was still. Sergeant Maya Thompson stood before the mirror in her bedroom, fastening the final button of her uniform. The polished brass of her medals caught the light, their edges sharp and deliberate. Each piece of her attire, the crease in her trousers, the weight of her cap, the subtle scent of starch and steel, was ritual. Behind her, Nia sat on the bed, her violin resting beside her like a silent companion. She hadn't said much that morning. Neither had her mother. The unspoken understanding between them said enough. This day wasn't about anger. It was about something larger, dignity, visibility, consequence. Mama D hovered in the doorway, her face drawn with pride and worry. You sure you don't want me to come with you, baby? Maya shook her head gently. This is something I need to do alone. Nia finally spoke, her voice small but steady. Will they listen to you, Mama? Maya turned, kneeling in front of her daughter. They'll listen, she said quietly. Because I won't give them any other choice. She adjusted Nia's collar softly, like she used to before school. You remember what I always told you? Nia nodded. Stand tall. Speak truth. Maya smiled faintly. That's my girl. Then she rose, squared her shoulders, and stepped out into the world. The drive to the precinct was silent except for the hum of the engine and the rhythmic tap of Maya's wedding ring against the steering wheel. Her mind moved in practiced order: observation, preparation, execution. She wasn't thinking about rage anymore, that emotion had burned itself clean. What remained was purpose. As she turned onto Fifth Avenue, the building came into view, the Oak Ridge Police Department. Its glass facade reflecting the gray sky. A small crowd had already gathered outside. Protest signs dotted the sidewalks: "Justice for Nia, protect our children, accountability now." News vans lined the curb, their satellite dishes pointed upward like iron trees. Microphones bristled at the edges of the steps. Maya parked a short distance away, turned off the ignition, and took one long, steady breath. When she opened the door, the world seemed to tilt slightly. Conversations halted. Heads turned. Cameras clicked. The sight of a decorated black female sergeant stepping through the crowd in full uniform had a gravitational pull all its own. Her boots struck the wet pavement with the slow, rhythmic sound of certainty. Every movement was precise, deliberate, the walk of a soldier who knew both battlefield and injustice intimately. A reporter called out, "Sergeant Thompson. Is it true your daughter was the victim in the Oak Ridge incident?" Maya didn't break stride. "You already know it's true," she said without looking back. "Now I'm here to make sure it never happens again." The crowd parted as she approached the precinct doors. An officer inside held them open, but his hands shook slightly. Even the air conditioning seemed to falter when she entered. The lobby looked different in daylight, sterile, polished, pretending to be professional. But Maya saw the cracks, the wary glances, the tightened jaws, the uncomfortable stillness that followed her through the metal detectors. A young receptionist stood at the desk, clearly nervous. "Ma'am, can I help you?" "Yes," Maya said evenly. "I'm here to see Captain Harris." The woman hesitated. "He's in a meeting right now, Sergeant." "Then you'll want to tell him that meeting is over." The words weren't loud, but they carried enough weight that the woman picked up the phone without another question. Moments later, the captain himself appeared, older, heavier, his eyes tired from the night's chaos. "Sergeant Thompson." "Sergeant, Internal Affairs will review." "No," Maya said. "They'll act." She reached into her folder and slid a document across the table, a formal complaint, notarized, with the video footage attached. "This isn't going to vanish into bureaucracy. The world has seen it. You've got community leaders outside demanding accountability. I'm here to ensure they get it, lawfully, transparently, and permanently." The captain took the file, reading silently. His face paled. "You've already contacted legal counsel." "I've contacted the Department of Justice." The room erupted in whispers. Connolly shifted in his seat, his confidence finally cracking. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he muttered. Maya fixed him with a look that silenced him completely. "No, officer. You did that when you decided humiliation was a form of humor." Then she turned to the captain. "I expect his suspension papers by noon. And I want a public statement from the department acknowledging wrongdoing before sunset. You owe that to my daughter, and to every parent watching that video wondering if their child will be next." Captain Harris met her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Yes, Sergeant. You'll have it." Maya straightened her cap. "Good." As she left the room, her boots echoed through the hallway, a sound both solemn and triumphant. Reporters rushed forward as she exited the building, shouting questions, but she paused at the top of the precinct steps. Her voice carried over the murmuring crowd. "My daughter was stopped, mocked, and humiliated for carrying an instrument, not because she broke the law, but because someone failed to see her humanity. That ends today. I didn't come here as a victim's mother. I came as a soldier, to remind this city that justice doesn't wear color. The crowd erupted in applause and tears. Cameras flashed. And for the first time since the laughter on Oak Ridge Street, Nia's story began to sound like something bigger than pain, like the beginning of change. The world that had once ignored Oak Ridge Street now watched it with unblinking eyes. By sunrise, the viral clip had been rebroadcast on every major network, dissected on talk shows, and shared by thousands who saw in it something they couldn't unsee: the casual cruelty of power, the fragile composure of innocence. At the center of it all was a 14-year-old girl with a violin, and a mother who refused to let silence have the last word. Inside the Oak Ridge police precinct that morning, the air was thick with the hum of tension and fluorescent light. Officers whispered in the corridors, phones rang without pause, and the coffee room TV replayed the same footage, Connolly's laughter frozen mid-frame, his words clear as day. No one could defend what the camera had already condemned. Captain Harris sat at his desk, eyes rimmed red, watching the live broadcast of a local news anchor reading a statement. The Oak Ridge Police Department has suspended Officer Dale Connolly pending investigation after a video surfaced showing racially inappropriate conduct during a stop involving a 14-year-old student, identified as Nia Thompson. He turned the volume down and rubbed his temples. Then the door opened, and Sergeant Maya Thompson stepped inside, not as a guest this time, but as the reckoning itself. "Morning, Captain," she said evenly. Her uniform was spotless, the brass insignia gleaming like defiance made visible. He gestured for her to sit. "Sergeant Thompson, things are moving fast. The mayor's office has scheduled a press conference for 3 o'clock. The DA's reviewing the footage. Internal Affairs has already begun questioning personnel." "Good," Maya replied. "Then let's make sure they don't forget why they're doing it." The captain hesitated, glancing toward the frosted glass window where the faint silhouettes of officers shifted uneasily. "You understand this department's under a microscope now. Every word you say will be the truth." She interrupted. "And I can live with that." Before he could respond, the door opened again. Officer Connolly entered, shoulders stiff, his face drawn tight with resentment. His badge was missing from his chest, replaced by a hollow rectangle of faded fabric. Maya turned slowly toward him, and the air seemed to contract. "Sergeant," he muttered, eyes avoiding hers. "Officer," she answered, voice calm but edged like tempered steel. "You came to apologize, I assume." He exhaled sharply. "I came to clear my name." Harris's head snapped up. "Dale, that's enough." But Maya lifted a hand, silencing the captain. "No, let him speak. It's good for the world to hear how he justifies humiliation." Connolly's jaw tightened. "You think you know what it's like out there? The tension? The split-second judgments? You wear a uniform, you should understand." "I understand perfectly," Maya said, rising to her feet. "I understand that the power we hold in uniform is sacred. And I understand that fear doesn't give you permission to dehumanize a child." She looked suspicious, he muttered. It was dark. It was 4 in the afternoon. Her tone cut through his excuses like a blade. There was sunlight, laughter, people watching. The only thing dark in that moment was your prejudice. He glared at her, defensive but shaken. "You don't know me." "No," she said softly. "But my daughter does. She knows your smirk. Your words. The way you made her feel small when she was simply walking home. You don't need to point a gun to break someone, sometimes a sneer is enough. The captain shifted uncomfortably, his gaze moving between them. The fluorescent light buzzed louder, a nervous pulse in the room. Connolly's voice faltered. You don't know what it's like to be accused like this. To have your name dragged. Maya took a slow step forward, close enough that he had to look at her. No, officer. I do. My husband wore this same uniform. He was killed protecting people who didn't see his skin color, only his bravery. And yet, here you stand, desecrating what that uniform stands for with your arrogance. Silence flooded the room. Connolly looked away, the weight of her words pressing down like truth made visible. Captain Harris cleared his throat. Sergeant, the department will be issuing a formal apology at the conference this afternoon. The chief himself will speak. We'd like you to attend. Maya nodded. I'll be there. But understand something, Captain, this isn't about PR or damage control. It's about reform. This system breeds men like him because it lets them believe they'll always walk away clean. That ends today. Her words didn't need to be loud. They simply were. By midday, the city gathered in front of the precinct. Rain threatened again, hanging in gray clouds above a restless crowd. Protesters held signs high, no justice, no peace, teach the badge to see humanity, for Nia. News cameras lined the barricades. The murmur of voices grew into a rhythmic chant. When the doors opened and the department officials stepped out, the crowd quieted. Captain Harris took the podium first, his tone measured but cautious. We acknowledge the misconduct that occurred on Oakridge Street. The department extends a formal apology to Miss Nia Thompson and her family. An internal and federal review is now underway. The words were expected, rehearsed. Then, without cue, Maya stepped forward beside him. Her uniform caught the muted sunlight. The captain didn't stop her. He knew better now. She looked out at the crowd, the mothers, the fathers, the faces of strangers who had made her daughter's pain their rallying cry. My child was stopped for walking home, she began. Her voice was steady, deliberate, amplified by the microphone yet somehow intimate enough to touch every listener. She was laughed at, belittled, and accused of being something less than human, all while holding the instrument that represents her dreams. Cameras clicked like heartbeats. I stand here not just as her mother, she continued, but as a soldier, an officer, and a citizen. I've seen combat. I've faced enemies on foreign soil. But nothing prepared me for watching the uniform I serve under become a weapon against my own child. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Even the officers on the steps behind her stood rigid, eyes lowered. Maya's tone softened, but it carried deeper. We wear these badges to serve, not to dominate. To protect, not to profile. Every one of us who wears this blue owes the people we serve more than apologies. We owe them change. She paused, the silence hanging thick. Justice isn't just a word carved on courthouse walls, she said. It's the moment we choose to do what's right, even when no one is watching. Yesterday, the world watched. Today, it expects better. Let's give it something worth believing in. The applause began softly, then swelled into a wave that shook the air. Reporters shouted her name, microphones thrust forward, but Maya didn't speak again. She simply turned from the podium and walked toward the crowd, where Nia stood between Mama D and Tasha, her small hands gripping the violin case. Their eyes met. In that look, the noise faded, mother and daughter, soldier and child, pain and pride merging into one moment of silent power. Nia opened the case slowly, lifting her violin as the chants quieted. The bow met the strings. The first trembling note rose, then steadied, clear, pure, defiant. Her melody wove through the crowd like light breaking through storm clouds. Officer Connolly, watching from the steps behind the glass doors, felt the sound wash over him, not forgiveness, but consequence. For the first time in his career, he understood what it meant to be seen not as authority, but as the lesson itself. And as Nia played beneath the gray sky, her mother stood beside her, not as a symbol of rage, but of resolve. The reckoning had come, not with fists, not with vengeance, but with truth. Strong enough to echo through generations. The storm did not end with applause, it began there. What followed the press conference was a wave of consequence that rolled through Oak Ridge like thunder over still water. Every corridor of the police department seemed to vibrate with unease. The video, once just an online spark, had turned into a national firestorm. News vans camped outside the station 24 hours a day, reporters pressed their microphones against the rain-streaked glass, and city officials whispered the word resignation more than anyone dared to admit aloud. For years, the precinct had operated under a quiet rhythm of routine authority, morning briefings, patrols, coffee, paperwork, and silence. But now the silence was gone. And in its place came scrutiny. Officer Dale Connolly sat alone in his kitchen, the blinds drawn, his phone face down on the table. The world outside had turned hostile. His name was trending for all the wrong reasons. The department had officially suspended him pending investigation, but he already knew what that meant. His badge was gone. His authority was gone. He hadn't stepped outside in 2 days. A half-empty beer sat beside a cold slice of pizza. His voicemail was full, messages from fellow officers saying they couldn't reach out right now, from reporters asking for comment, and from an unknown number that kept leaving the same word, shame. He switched on the TV out of restless habit. There she was again, Sergeant Maya Thompson, speaking on a morning show in full uniform, calm and commanding. "We're not calling for vengeance," she said. "We're calling for accountability. Every officer who wears a badge must also wear responsibility. You can't have one without the other." Dale turned the volume down. The sound of her voice made something inside him twist, not guilt exactly, but a raw, unfamiliar discomfort. He had mocked hundreds of people in his career, most of them poor, many of them black. It had always felt. "Listen up," he began. "We're implementing new oversight measures effective immediately. Every officer on patrol will wear an active body camera. Training sessions on racial sensitivity and procedural justice begin next week. And there will be mandatory reviews of all stop and search data for the past 12 months. A murmur rippled through the room. Someone muttered, "So we're just bowing down to politics now?" Harris looked up sharply. "No. We're fixing what's been broken for far too long." The words carried weight because even he knew they were overdue. For years, he'd ignored complaints that didn't make headlines. Now the headlines had forced his hand. As the meeting broke apart, whispers filled the hallways. Some officers nodded in quiet agreement, others scowled in resentment. The storm inside the department wasn't just administrative, it was moral. Meanwhile, Maya Thompson sat in her kitchen, the sunlight slanting across the table. Her uniform jacket hung neatly on the chair beside her. She had been invited to speak at the upcoming city council hearing on law enforcement reform, a role she hadn't sought but couldn't refuse. Across the table, Nia practiced softly on her violin. The melody was tentative but steady, filling the air with fragile peace. Each note seemed to erase a fraction of the ugliness from the week before. "Mom?" Nia asked suddenly. "Why do people hate us without knowing us?" Maya looked up slowly. "Because hate is easy, baby. Understanding takes effort. Will it ever change?" Her mother sighed. "It already is. You started it." Nia blinked. "Me?" "Your voice, your calm, your courage, it made people look. You showed them what dignity looks like under pressure. That's more powerful than shouting." Nia smiled faintly and went back to her violin, her bow gliding across the strings with new confidence. Maya's phone buzzed. The caller ID read, "Captain Harris." "Sergeant," he said as she answered. "I wanted to tell you personally, the chief has decided to recommend full termination for Connolly. The district attorney's office is reviewing potential charges under civil misconduct statutes." Maya closed her eyes. "It's the right call." "There's something else," Harris added. "The mayor wants to meet you tomorrow. There's talk of you leading a new community policing task force." Maya paused. "You're serious?" "As serious as this storm we're in," he said. "The city needs someone the people can trust." She exhaled slowly, staring at her daughter's reflection in the window, the bow rising and falling like a heartbeat. "Then let's make it count." Across the city, the conversation had shifted. On social media, hashtags multiplied, hashtag justice for Nia, hashtag uniforms and humanity, hashtag see her face. News anchors debated not just the event, but the culture behind it. Churches, schools, and even local businesses hosted discussions about race, power, and respect. What had begun as a single moment of cruelty had evolved into a mirror held up to an entire system. But not everyone welcomed it. Anonymous emails flooded the precinct's inbox, threats, taunts, claims that the department was betraying its own. One night, a brick shattered the window of the station's front desk, scrawled with the words, "Blue Betrayal." It was clear, the storm was not one-sided. Even within the force, factions formed, those who wanted reform, and those who wanted revenge for being exposed. But Maya knew storms weren't meant to destroy, they were meant to cleanse. The next evening, the city council chamber overflowed with people. The press lights burned bright, and rows of citizens filled every seat. Maya stood behind the podium, wearing her uniform once again, though this time her medals felt less like armor and more like responsibility. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady but resonant. "I never asked to become a symbol. I only asked for justice." What? The city of Oak Ridge had never seen such a crowd gathered for a single event. It wasn't a parade. It wasn't a festival. It was a reckoning disguised as ceremony. The steps of City Hall were draped with banners calling for reform now. Police cruisers lined the street not to contain protesters but to protect them. The air was thick with tension and purpose. 1,000 murmurs blended into a low human hum that rolled through the humid afternoon like the prelude to thunder. At the center of the marble steps stood a wooden podium and a single microphone. Behind it, a row of city officials, the mayor, the police chief, Captain Harris, and several officers in dress blues, all wearing the solemn expressions of men and women forced to confront what they could no longer hide behind policy. Television cameras framed the scene from every angle. The world was watching. Among the crowd stood Nia Thompson, dressed in a pale blue dress, her violin case slung over her shoulder. Beside her, her mother, Sergeant Maya Thompson, stood in full uniform. The medals across her chest gleamed under the muted sunlight, less decoration, more declaration. When the mayor finally stepped to the podium, the noise began to fade. The cameras whirred. The crowd stilled. Citizens of Oak Ridge, he began, his voice carrying through the square, we gather here today to acknowledge a wrong, one that should never have happened, and one that must never happen again. He paused, searching the crowd. His gaze found Nia, standing tall despite the weight of all those eyes. The events of last week reminded us that justice cannot live in silence, the mayor continued. What happened to young Miss Thompson was not a misunderstanding. It was a failure, of training, of empathy, and of leadership. A murmur rippled through the crowd, agreement, sorrow, fury. The mayor glanced to his right. Today, this department will speak directly to the people it serves. Captain Harris, the floor is yours. Harris. The city of Oak Ridge had never seen such a crowd gathered for a single event. It wasn't a parade. It wasn't a festival. It was a reckoning disguised as ceremony. The steps of City Hall were draped with banners calling for reform now. Police cruisers lined the street not to contain protesters but to protect them. The air was thick with tension and purpose. 1,000 murmurs blended into a low human hum that rolled through the humid afternoon like the prelude to thunder. At the center of the marble steps stood a wooden podium and a single microphone. Behind it, a row of city officials, the mayor, the police chief, Captain Harris, and several officers in dress blues, all wearing the solemn expressions of men and women forced to confront what they could no longer hide behind policy. Television cameras framed the scene from every angle. The world was watching. Among the crowd stood Nia Thompson, dressed in a pale blue dress, her violin case slung over her shoulder. Beside her, her mother, Sergeant Maya Thompson, stood in full uniform. The medals across her chest gleamed under the muted sunlight, less decoration, more declaration. When the mayor finally stepped to the podium, the noise began to fade. The cameras whirred. The crowd stilled. Citizens of Oak Ridge, he began, his voice carrying through the square, we gather here today to acknowledge a wrong, one that should never have happened, and one that must never happen again. He paused, searching the crowd. His gaze found Nia, standing tall despite the weight of all those eyes. The events of last week reminded us that justice cannot live in silence, the mayor continued. What happened to young Miss Thompson was not a misunderstanding. It was a failure, of training, of empathy, and of leadership. A murmur rippled through the crowd, agreement, sorrow, fury. The mayor glanced to his right. Today, this department will speak directly to the people it serves. Captain Harris, the floor is yours. Harris adjusted his tie, stepped forward, and cleared his throat. His voice, though steady, carried the sound of a man haunted by his own delay in doing what was right. I've worn this badge for 30 years, he began, and I've always believed it stood for protection. But what happened on Oak Ridge Street broke that promise. He swallowed hard. To Miss Nia Thompson and to her mother, Sergeant Thompson, on behalf of this department, I offer our deepest apology. The actions of one man do not reflect the heart of this force, but they revealed a sickness we can no longer deny. The cameras zoomed in. The crowd watched every expression. From somewhere behind the officials, a figure shifted, Officer Dale Connolly. Dressed in plain clothes now, he looked smaller, his usual bravado gone. He stepped forward, escorted by 2 internal affairs officers. The crowd gasped as he approached the podium. Harris handed him the microphone. Connolly hesitated, his fingers trembling as he adjusted the mic. His voice, when it came, was low and strained. I want to say I'm sorry. The words hung in the air, fragile, almost unbelievable. He looked directly at Nia, and his voice wavered. When I stopped you that day, I told myself I was doing my job. But I wasn't. I was protecting my pride, not the public. I disrespected you. I disrespected your mother. And I disrespected this uniform. No one moved. The only sound was the faint clicking of camera shutters. I can't undo what I did, Connolly continued, but I can admit what it was: racism, arrogance, and cowardice. I've spent the last week realizing how many times I got away with the same behavior because no one filmed it. Because people were too afraid to speak. He swallowed hard, voice cracking. You shouldn't have had to be the one to make me see it. He stepped back from the podium, shaking, as murmurs rippled through the crowd, disbelief, some forgiveness, some contempt. Then Maya stepped forward. Her boots clicked sharply against the marble, her figure straight and unyielding. The crowd fell into silence again. She didn't take the microphone right away. She looked first at her daughter, then at Connolly, then out across the sea of faces: police officers, journalists, parents, children, teachers, veterans. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, rich, and resonant, the kind of voice that didn't ask for attention but commanded it. Apologies matter, she said softly. But change matters more. Her words echoed across the plaza. An apology doesn't erase what happened on Oak Ridge Street. It doesn't take away the humiliation my daughter felt, or the fear she'll carry every time she sees flashing lights behind her. But it's a start we have to build on. She looked directly at the officers standing behind her. Every uniform you wear is a promise. Not to control, but to protect. Not to assume, but to understand. Every day you walk into that station, remember my daughter's face. Remember what happens when the badge forgets its purpose. Her gaze swept across the crowd. Justice isn't one speech, one firing, one viral clip. It's the work that begins after the cameras go home. The applause began quietly this time, soft, restrained, then grew louder, rising like a wave that rolled through the crowd and up the marble steps. It wasn't the wild cheering of triumph, but the deep, resonant sound of respect. Maya turned to Nia and gave a small nod. Nia stepped forward, her small fingers unclasping the violin case. She lifted the instrument with trembling grace, adjusted the bow, and without a word began to play. The sound cut through the air like something sacred. The melody was Amazing Grace. But this time, it wasn't the song of mourning she had played before. It was strong, deliberate, a song of reclamation. The notes climbed higher, bolder, weaving through the damp afternoon air and across the faces of the crowd. Reporters lowered their cameras. Officers removed their hats. Even Connolly bowed his head. For those few minutes, the city stood still, not as black or white, not as cop or civilian, but as witnesses to something rare, truth expressed through the purity of sound. When the last note faded, the applause returned, louder than before, and some people wept openly. The mayor leaned into the microphone. Miss Thompson, thank you. You've reminded us what grace truly means. Maya placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. You did good, baby. Nia smiled faintly, tears glimmering in her eyes. I just played what I felt. That's all justice ever is, Maya whispered. Making people feel what they've tried not to see. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the courthouse dome, Oak Ridge felt quieter, not healed, but honest. On the steps, the city's flags fluttered softly in the wind. Maya and Nia walked to their car hand in hand. The square behind them buzzed with conversations, strangers shaking hands, officers standing beside the same people they once feared. Something subtle had shifted. As they reached the car, a young cadet approached, barely 20, nervous, holding his hat in both hands. "Sergeant Thompson," he said. "I just wanted to say, thank you. You made me want to be the kind of cop my mom would be proud of." Maya looked at him, really looked, and smiled. "Then start tomorrow," she said. "That's how change works." He nodded, his eyes bright, and walked away. Maya looked at her daughter, who was staring up at the city skyline. The clouds were clearing now, streaks of gold breaking through the gray. Nia whispered, "Mom, maybe one day people won't have to apologize for seeing us wrong." Maya's heart swelled. "That's the world we're building, sweetheart. One note, one truth at a time." They got into the car, the fading light glinting off the violin case resting between them. And for the first time in a long time, the city of Oak Ridge exhaled, not because the storm had passed, but because it had finally, honestly, begun to clear. It was late autumn when the city of Oak Ridge finally grew quiet again. The signs that once filled the streets had been folded and stored away, but their messages remained etched in windows, murals, and memory. Leaves drifted across Oak Ridge Street where everything had begun, red, gold, and brown, swirling in the chill wind like the ghosts of voices that refused to fade. Life was moving on. But it was not returning to what it had been. At Lincoln Middle School, the gymnasium buzzed with soft chatter and the faint scrape of folding chairs. A hand-painted banner stretched across the stage. Oak Ridge Unity Concert, honoring courage, inspiring change. It was Nia's idea. When her teacher, Mr. Carter, suggested ending the semester with something meaningful, she'd raised her hand and said quietly, "Maybe we could play for everyone, together." Now the audience filled the room, parents, students, local officials, and rows of uniformed officers sitting alongside community members. The mayor sat near the front, flanked by Captain Harris and Sergeant Maya Thompson. Nia stood backstage, her violin tucked beneath her arm. Her dress shimmered pale silver under the stage lights. She took a deep breath, her reflection trembling slightly in the metal of her bow. "Ready, sweetheart?" Maya asked, kneeling beside her. "I think so," Nia said, voice barely above a whisper. Her mother smiled, straightened her daughter's collar, and whispered, "You've already done the hardest part. Tonight's just music." Nia nodded, exhaling slowly. "Will Officer Connolly be here?" Maya paused. "He asked if he could come. I told him that forgiveness is earned, not invited. If he shows up, it's to listen." Then she pressed a kiss to Nia's forehead. "Go on, baby. Show them who you are." The stage lights dimmed. Applause rippled softly through the room as the curtains parted. The student orchestra took their seats, a sea of nervous faces and shining instruments. Nia walked to the center, the spotlight finding her like a promise fulfilled. For a moment, the noise of the world outside, the news cycles, the arguments, the politics, fell away. All that existed was a young girl, a violin, and a silence waiting to be filled. She raised her bow, glanced at her music teacher, and began to play. The first notes floated through the air, delicate as breath, then deepened into warmth. The melody was her own, a composition she'd written and titled Oak Ridge Dawn. It was not a song of sorrow, but of becoming. The music began low, like the sound of footsteps on wet pavement, the memory of that day. Then, gently, the melody rose into something bright and unwavering, full of light breaking through cloud. It carried the rhythm of resilience, the heartbeat of those who had refused to look away. When the final note lingered, the entire room stayed still. Then came the applause, thunderous, echoing through the rafters until even Nia's hands trembled with disbelief. Her mother was the first to stand, tears glimmering as she clapped. One by one, the officers rose too. So did the mayor, the teachers, the students. And then, from the very back of the hall, someone else stood, awkwardly, hesitantly. It was Dale Connolly. He wasn't in uniform. His posture was unsure, his eyes red-rimmed, but his hands came together slowly, sincerely. The crowd noticed, murmurs rippled, but no one jeered. For the first time, he looked not like a figure of power, but like a man stripped to his humanity. Nia saw him and froze for half a heartbeat. Then she lowered her violin, gave a small nod, and turned back to the crowd. In that single gesture, quiet and dignified, she did what generations struggled to do, acknowledge. Without excusing, move forward without forgetting. Later, as the crowd dispersed into the cool evening, the city lights glittered like scattered stars. Maya and Nia walked side by side down the school steps, the night wind tugging gently at their clothes. Reporters approached but kept their distance this time. There was no need for more questions. The story was already written, in hearts, not headlines. "Proud of you," Maya said softly. Nia smiled. "You think Dad would have been proud too?" Maya's eyes softened. "He'd have cried through the whole performance." They laughed quietly. The air between them felt lighter now, though beneath it lived something lasting, a deeper knowing of the world and of themselves. As they reached the parking lot, Maya noticed a figure standing near the edge of the sidewalk. It was Connolly again, hands in his pockets, head bowed. He stepped forward cautiously. "Sergeant Thompson," he began. "Miss Thompson." Maya's body tensed, but her expression stayed composed. "Officer Connolly." He nodded. "Not officer anymore. I turned in my badge yesterday. Figured I should earn a different kind of title before I wear another." She studied him in silence. His tone held no arrogance, no self-defense, only the quiet fatigue of a man beginning to understand. "I wanted to thank you," he continued. "For not letting this disappear like the others. For holding me accountable. It forced me to see how much I'd stopped seeing people." Maya's voice was calm. "You don't thank someone for truth. You live by it." He nodded slowly. "I'm trying. I've been volunteering with the youth mentorship program at the rec center. They've got a lot of kids like Nia, bright, stubborn, hopeful. I want to help them become the kind of people I should have protected all along." Maya considered his words for a long moment, then gave a quiet nod. "Then start there. But remember, atonement isn't a finish line. It's a lifetime's work." He managed a faint, humbled smile. "Yes, ma'am." Then he turned and walked away, swallowed by the streetlights. Nia watched him go, her young face thoughtful. "Do you think people like him really change, Mama?" Maya glanced at the stars above the school, glowing faintly through the haze. "Sometimes they do. When the mirrors finally held close enough, even the blind start to see." That night, the Thompson home glowed with a quiet peace. The television played softly in the background, showing highlights of the concert. Nia sat cross-legged on the floor, polishing her violin, while Maya sipped tea at the kitchen table, her uniform jacket draped across the chair. On the screen, the newscaster's voice floated gently. "Tonight, Oak Ridge came together not for politics, but for promise. What began as a tragedy ended in music, a melody of grace, change, and the enduring power of truth. Mama D called from the doorway, laughing softly. "Child, you played that thing like an angel with something to prove." Nia giggled. "Maybe I did." Maya smiled, watching them. "Angels don't prove, baby. They remind." Nia tilted her head. "Remind us of what?" "That even in a world full of noise," Maya said, her eyes warm, "a single honest note can still make people listen." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, a sound that felt less like ending and more like beginning. Weeks later, a new plaque appeared on the wall outside Oak Ridge Police Department. It read, "Justice is not a uniform. It is a choice, made daily, carried with courage." Dedicated to the Thompson family, whose grace reminded this city of its duty. Every recruit who joined the force from that day forward was required to read it aloud on their first day. And sometimes, when evening settled over the quiet streets, a violin's melody would drift through the open window of a small house on Oak Ridge Street, clear, calm, and strong. It was the sound of a girl who had found her voice, and a city that had finally learned to listen. The lesson wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about victory. It was about transformation, the understanding that the badge itself was only metal, but what it symbolized could either wound or heal, depending on the heart that wore it. That was the lesson beyond the badge. And Oak Ridge, for the first time in its long, complicated history, seemed ready to learn.